Greetings and welcome to this, our 11th class on the book of Revelation. The class is subtitled Apocalypse as Hope, and tonight we will be discussing the woman and the beast. But first, a brief review. Last week we considered the 10th and 11th chapters of Revelation, where we read of an angel with a little scroll and two witnesses who preach until they are killed, but then are raised again, I might add. We considered these illustrations in an attempt to understand what the apocalypse is meant to reveal to the first century church in Asia Minor. Basically, the message is consistent throughout the book of Revelation. The two witnesses are meant to inspire Christians to live as courageously as they can in the face of persecution and travail. Tonight, we'll be considering the 11th chapter, starting at verse 15 of Revelation, and then going on through the 12th chapter, where we'll read of the sounding of the seventh trumpet and then quickly move past that to a narrative involving a woman and a dragon. And we'll try to discuss the symbolic meaning found in chapter 12 especially. For here John takes us on a brief detour before we pick back up with the third cycle of 7, which involves bowls, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks. But let's first begin with chapter 11, verse 15, which reads, "Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, 'The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever.' Then the 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshipped God, singing, 'We give you thanks, Lord God Almighty, who are and who were, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath has come, and the time for judging the dead, for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints and all who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying those who destroy the earth.' Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple. And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail." As I said, this goes rather quickly, the blowing of the seventh trumpet, less detail fleshed out as was the case with the opening of the seventh seal. But we do get a description of what happens next in short, quick and fairly vague in details, albeit. We have another glimpse into the heavenly throne room, where the entire ensemble are gripped in praise and amazement at what God has done. And what has God done, in case you missed it? Well, God has done it all. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever. So here is a glimpse into the future, to the end of the book where we read of a new heavens and a new earth. It's like the curtain has been pulled back and we see a little bit of what's coming up. While the conclusion of the opening of the seventh seal, at the conclusion of the opening of the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven. Here we witness a heaven that is jubilant because God has completed the work. This is just a different perspective on heaven's response. The ark has been returned to the temple, which indicates that God is now fully present with the people. Those who knew the history of Israel would have recognized this right away. And that's all for the blowing of the seventh trumpet. And now we'll move on to the 12th chapter, starting with verse 1, which reads, "A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth." Who is this woman? In later centuries, interpreters surmised that the woman symbolizes Mary, the mother of Jesus. Plausible, but I think, as do biblical scholars generally, I'm going to go with the majority here because what do I know? I think that she is rather meant to represent womanhood generally, and this would include Mary. This story about the battles between God and the woman and the dragon are meant to call our minds to the story of Eve and the serpent in the garden. This is one of the reasons I also think that this represents all womanhood, because Eve represents that as well. But she also represents birth and struggle. But more significantly, she represents, and here I'm quoting Brian Blunt, the power of God to birth and build up the believing community. The dragon represents the power to destroy that community at any point from its inception onward. End quote. And the woman is in agony as humanity's struggle to produce the sort of life God intends has been fraught with struggle and failure on the part of the human race. This is why she travails in pain. Verse 3, then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to deliver a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. The dragon is a metaphor for historical powers like Egypt that assailed God's people. One might also infer other empires that came after, Babylon, Persia, the Greeks. Red symbolizes destruction, as was the case with the red horse earlier, with the 4 horses of the apocalypse and the horsemen. Red horse symbolized war, which involves destruction. Horns symbolize power. Diadems symbolize royal authority. This dragon stands in waiting for whatever human life God may generate. The dragon is hell-bent on destroying. Right now, the stage is heaven, but the onslaught of the earth has begun, signified by the casting down of 1/3 of heaven's stars. One might also make comparisons to the dragon in Daniel chapter 8, verse 10. Reading on, and she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a scepter of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. Brian Leonard writes of this, the woman bears a male child, identified as the royal Messiah by means of the image of the iron rod. The dragon is not able to destroy the child, for he is snatched away to the throne of God. The woman flees into the desert or wilderness. Wilderness has paradoxical qualities. It is a place of drought, famine, demonic powers, dangerous animals, and akin to chaos prior to creation. On the other hand, it is a place of salvation, deliverance, and redemption. For the mother of Revelation chapter 12, the wilderness is a sanctuary, a place prepared for her by God, where she dwells for 1,260 days. The experience of the woman mirrors the experience of the Israelite people, who found both solace and struggle in the wilderness. Also, one may call to mind Hagar's story, also Elijah's, and many others. It's a running trope in the scriptures. Now, as for this number, very specific, 1,260, that's half of 7 years, signifying a determinate, limited period of time. This is good news, as the duration of the woman's stay in the wilderness is obviously symbolic. The time of the woman's hiding corresponds, therefore, to the time when the dragon will seek out and persecute the people of God because of their witness. Since the figure represents exactly half of 7 years, John in each case means to suggest that it is a temporary period. The time of victory and vindication, by contrast, will be eternal. And if that were being described here, it would be a full 7 years worth of days. But the fact that it's half of that signifies that this suffering and the destruction the dragon can bring about on the earth has its limits. It will not go on forever. Reading on, picking up with verse 7, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. This is the only time the angel Michael is mentioned in Revelation. He's quite a popular angel and mentioned in other Jewish scriptures and even other Christian scriptures, but this is the only time here. He is not given any introduction, so one can assume that the original audience would have been aware of the stories that surrounded him, but his mention in the Christian canon is sparse, mentioned only one other time in the book of Jude, verse 9. He is featured far more prominently in Daniel, where he is the defender of the people. In Revelation 12, he defends heaven. Michael represents God's combat ability in the same way that the woman represents God's procreative potential. God far surpasses the dragon and therefore need not engage him directly. God's subordinates can do the job. Then the dragon and his forces are defeated, at least in heaven. But now the great dragon has been cast down to earth, where he will continue to attempt to destroy what God creates, especially what God has made in God's image. Verse 9 goes out of its way to identify the dragon. Quoting Brian Blunt here, a rather lengthy quote, if you bear with me. It is the ancient serpent. John uses the definite article because he assumes his hearers and readers will recognize this figure from their traditions. The ancient serpent was the deceiver of the entire world. His deception of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden led to the sinful separation of the entire world from its intended relationship with God in Genesis chapter 3. As punishment for that deception, God promised perpetual enmity between the seed or sperma of the woman and the seed of the serpent. This explains why, when John chooses to describe the hostility between the dragon and the woman's children, he surprisingly refers to her children with the same term, sperma, in the Greek, that is primarily used to designate a male's offspring. The battle between the church and the dragon is the eschatological result of the primordial conflict initiated by the serpent's deception. All this to say, the cosmic battle created in word pictures is meant to echo the ongoing battle between the forces of good and evil in our own world and in our own times, going back to the very beginnings of humanity. Picking up with verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaiming, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. But they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they did not cling to life even in the face of death. Rejoice then, you heavens and those who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you with great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." The narrative is broken up in the middle by this hymn proclaimed by a heavenly voice. Heaven rejoices at the casting out of the great dragon and his forces from heaven, but they have a lament for the earth as its creatures will be left to struggle against humanity's ancient foe. This is the reader's ancient/modern status quo, the world as we know it. But woe to the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you. That's what that means. However, verse 11 iterates what the reader or the hearer of this letter should already know by now. The witness of Jesus, his willingness to confront and not conform to Rome's imperial demands, even unto death, and the continued witness of the saints defeat the dragon, which is Satan, which is the catch-all for evil incarnate. The message to the church here is, you too should confront and not conform to Rome's imperial demands. Instead, be willing to be a witness like Jesus, the slain lamb. For the devil has come down to you with great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. In other words, because of the witness of Jesus and the church and the authority given them over evil by God, the evil on earth will not last forever, and people like you and I will be a part of the solution. Verse 13, so when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had delivered the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time. After the heavenly hymn, the narrative picked back up. Now the battle is waged on the earth. The dragon's struggle against the woman, which may also represent here the church, specifically continues. So, too, does God's divine protection. Rowland writes, she is given the 2 wings of the great eagle, which echoes a favorite theme of Revelation, patient endurance. The theme of finding solace in the wilderness is repeated. Here is a message to the church. God will keep you, and your time in the wilderness will not last forever. Or, more relevant to Revelation's first audience, the reign of Rome and all other human governments that would assume God's authority, they are limited. Verse 15, then from his mouth the serpent poured water like a river after the woman, to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman. It opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to wage war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. Rowland writes, the war in heaven between Satan's host and the host of Michael, in verse 7, now has its earthly counterpart, as that multitude who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb must engage in the struggle with Satan's earthly representative, the beast, the evil empire. Verse 17 makes it clear that the reason the forces of evil array against the woman's offspring, or the faithful witnesses, or the church, is because of the witness of the followers of Jesus. This was a fact already well established at the writing of this letter, as the church had already endured several periods of persecution. Blunt writes, according to chapter 2, verses 26 through 27, those who keep to this way of witnessing will conquer and thereby find themselves tasked with the same role as that of the messianic son, the shepherding of the people with an iron rod. In other words, those who keep witnessing will, like Christ himself, be leaders of God's people, even if they may also, like Christ, suffer persecution because of that leadership. They can be assured, though, that like Christ, they too will conquer. Even though they may be killed, they too will receive eschatological relationship with God, salvation. Verse 18, then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore, and here we have a change of scenery. But we'll cover that in our next lesson. So we'll end on a cliffhanger. Now some final thoughts. In chapter 12, John the Revelator writes of the cosmic struggle between good and evil. The battle is at first situated not on earth but in heaven. This should remind the reader that theirs is a struggle that is but the most recent chapter in a long narrative of birth, struggle, perseverance, and deliverance. In widening the lens, we are left with the image of a much larger struggle between the forces of good and evil than those simply confined to our own times and contexts. Rome was but the latest player in a long succession of would-be God-king-led empires trying to position themselves as the supreme power. But as this narrative suggests, the intentions of those working towards destruction, both in heaven and on earth, will not come to fruition. Though they may cause great harm in the meantime, God puts limits to the scale of their destruction. And the final defeat of evil is certain in the vision cast by the book of Revelation. And therein is our hope. Readers in any age can find encouragement too, as we face our own challenges in these times. The metaphorical dragons we might fight in 2026, the most recent chapters in the cosmic struggle, they will not overwhelm God's creation or the human race in the end. take a moment for questions or comments. If you're watching this online, email them to me. My email is heath@indncc.org. That's indyncc.org. heath@indncc.org. Here is a reading list if you're wanting to check out some of the sources that I consulted for the production of this presentation. Next week, we'll pick back up our study in the 13th chapter of Revelation. The title of that lesson is called Two Beasts, and we'll talk about that then, which is on Tuesday, August the 18th in the year 2026 at 6:30 if you're there in person in the library at Northwood Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. But if you're watching this online or any other place, we're glad that you're here. Until then, peace.